Behind the performances, behind the voice everyone recognizes instantly of Depeche Mode, there was a period so dark it almost didn't have a way back. An overdose, 2 minutes clinically dead, and a memory he still describes in a way that doesn't sound like survival, it sounds like something else entirely. Now at 63, Depeche Mode's finally confirming details he avoided for years. Not rumors, not headlines. The reality of what actually happened, and what it did to him afterward. Before the fame, the chaos that shaped Dave Gahan. Before everything people think they know, you have to go back. Long before the music, before the stage, before the image. Because none of this started in a studio. It started in a childhood that never really felt stable. Dave was raised mostly by his mother, Sylvia, after his father walked out on the family. That alone would have been enough to leave a mark, but things didn't stop there. The man who stepped in, his stepfather, the one who truly became a real parent to him and his sister, suddenly died. And just like that, the one sense of stability he had was gone again. Then, just when you might expect some kind of closure, his biological father briefly reappeared, only to disappear once more. It was another break, another reminder that nothing in his life seemed to stay. By the time he was a teenager, that instability had turned into something else: anger, restlessness, a need for adrenaline. He wasn't just acting out, he was constantly in trouble, in and out of juvenile court, theft, joyriding, running from the police. He later admitted he loved the thrill of it, the speed, the danger, the chase. At one point, it almost went too far. He was on the edge of being sent to a detention center. And then something shifted. In 1980, music entered his life, and for the first time, it gave him a direction that didn't end in chaos. Fame, friction, and the battle no one saw coming. When Dave Gahan stepped into what was then called composition of sound, no one could have predicted what it would become. Alongside Martin Gore, Andy Fletcher, and Vince Clarke, the group slowly evolved, eventually taking on the name Depeche Mode, inspired by a French fashion magazine. From there, everything changed. The band exploded onto the global stage, building a sound that was dark, electronic, and instantly recognizable. Over time, they released 15 albums and sold more than 100 million records worldwide, turning Depeche Mode into one of the most influential bands of their era. And at the center of it all was Gahan, with that unmistakable voice and a stage presence that felt almost hypnotic. But success didn't mean stability. Behind the scenes, things were far more complicated. Gahan wasn't just the frontman. He wanted a deeper creative role. By the early 2000s, that tension had started to show. Frustrated with what he saw as a lack of evolution, he pushed to contribute more as a songwriter. That shift finally came in 2005 with Playing the Angel, where 3 of his songs made the cut, including Suffer Well, which went on to earn a Grammy nomination. At the same time, he was building something of his own. His solo work, albums like Paper Monsters and Hourglass, proved he wasn't just a voice for the band, but an artist with his own direction. The diagnosis that changed everything. But away from the music, his life was anything but steady. Addiction, personal struggles, and years of internal battles followed him well into adulthood. And then came something even more serious, something no one could outrun. It happened suddenly, just before a concert in Athens. Gahan began feeling severely unwell backstage and was rushed to the hospital. That's when doctors found it, a tumor in his bladder. The diagnosis was immediate, and so was the urgency. Surgery wasn't optional, it was necessary. The only reason there was still hope was because the tumor hadn't yet spread beyond the bladder wall. In one interview, Dave Gahan admitted the moment still feels unreal. At first, doctors thought it was something minor, just a stomach virus, nothing serious, nothing that would stop a tour. But when the pain didn't go away, they ran further tests. An ultrasound changed everything. What they found wasn't a virus. It was a tumor in his bladder. Even then, Dave didn't immediately accept it. His first instinct wasn't fear. It was negotiation. He was in the middle of an 8-month tour and tried to push through, insisting he couldn't just stop. But this wasn't something that could wait. His oncologist made that clear. The situation was serious, and delaying treatment wasn't an option. That was the moment it hit him. The surgery happened quickly. The tumor was removed, and eventually he was given the all-clear. But the experience left a mark that didn't fade. Dave later admitted that during that time, he genuinely believed he might not survive. Recovery wasn't just physical. It was emotional, and in many ways even harder. Dave recalled having deeply difficult conversations with his wife, Jennifer. At one point, he tried to reassure her, saying he would be okay. But she saw through it. She didn't want to hear him speak, as if he were preparing for the worst. Because that's what he was doing. He had started to talk like someone making peace with the idea of not coming back, saying he'd lived a good life, that their children would be okay. For Jennifer, that was unbearable. It wasn't acceptance. It sounded like goodbye. After the surgery, Dave had to go through regular checkups, including cystoscopies, procedures that were physically uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. Near-death experiences. Long before the cancer diagnosis, Dave Gahan had already been living dangerously close to the edge. As a heroin addict in Los Angeles, his life became a cycle of excess, collapse, and survival. Local paramedics even gave him a nickname, the Cat, because he kept coming back after multiple near-death incidents. There were warning signs everywhere. In 1993, during a show in New Orleans, he suffered a drug-induced heart attack on stage. The band had to carry on without him. Around the same time, his behavior was spiraling out of control behind the scenes. Even within Depeche Mode, it had become impossible to ignore. Alan Wilder later recalled tense meetings where Dave's drug use was directly confronted. It was put to Dave that if he didn't clean up his act, we wouldn't make it through such a long tour. He agreed. But agreement didn't mean change. At least not yet. What followed were some of the darkest moments of his life. He attempted suicide by cutting his wrists, later admitting it was a desperate cry for help, and revealing that he made sure he was somewhere people could find him in time. The pain wasn't hidden. It was overwhelming, constant, and getting worse. At one point, even his own family saw it firsthand. His mother and his young son, Jack, caught him using drugs in a bathroom. Reflecting on that period, Dave said, "My whole life was Spinal Tap at that time." And then came the detail that says everything. Sleeping in a coffin-shaped bed, curtains taped shut, completely disconnected from reality. Fame wasn't the cause. "That was the last thing I was worried about," he admitted. But nothing compares to what happened in 1996. That was the moment everything stopped. Literally. After overdosing on a speedball at the Sunset Marquis Hotel, Dave's heart gave out. Doctors later told him plainly, "You flatlined for a couple of minutes. You were dead." What he described next doesn't sound like survival. It sounds like something else entirely. "The first thing I realized in the hospital was that I exited my body," he said. "I was floating underneath the ceiling and could observe exactly what was happening underneath me." He remembered paramedics rushing around, trying to save him, while he was above them, watching. "I screamed that I wasn't actually lying down there but above them." Then came the darkness. "I believe it was my soul screaming. At that point, I was clinically dead. My heart wasn't beating. These seconds seemed like hours to me. And suddenly, there was a complete frightening darkness around me, as if someone had turned off the light." When he came back, it wasn't relief waiting for him. It was reality. "When I woke up, I was tied to the bed with handcuffs," he said. "Policemen were standing in front of me and read my rights to me. I was arrested because of possession of cocaine and heroin. That was the moment everything finally became clear. For the first time in my life, it became clear to me that I am not immortal. And that realization, more than anything, forced him to change. Recovery, loss, and carrying on. After everything, the overdoses, the arrest, the moment he was clinically dead, there was a point where it couldn't continue like that anymore. A few months after facing drug charges, Dave made a decision that would change the course of his life. He checked himself into rehab. Not half-heartedly. Not because he had to, but because he finally understood what was at stake. The damage, both physical and emotional, had already been done. But this was the beginning of something different. Recovery wasn't instant, and it wasn't easy. But for the first time, there was direction. A real effort to become someone who could survive his own life. Over time, things did begin to stabilize. He made it through addiction. He made it through cancer. He rebuilt relationships, reconnected with music, and found a version of himself that wasn't constantly on the edge. And then, just when things seemed steady, 2022 brought another blow. Andy Fletcher, his bandmate, his friend, one of the core pillars of Depeche Mode, passed away. It hit hard. For fans, it was shocking. For Dave, it was personal. This wasn't just someone he worked with. This was someone who had been there through everything. The rise, the chaos, the survival. There was no way to undo that loss, but there was a way to respond to it. Not long after, Dave and Martin Gore made a decision. They would keep going, but not in the same way. They announced a new album, Memento Mori, a title that itself carried weight, a reminder that life is fragile and nothing lasts forever. It wasn't just another project. It was a tribute, a way to honor Fletcher's place in the band's history. And they didn't stop there. In 2023, they took that message on the road, launching a major tour across North America and Europe. From Madison Square Garden in New York to the Kia Forum in Los Angeles, from Chicago to Toronto, and eventually to London's Twickenham Stadium, the shows weren't just performances. They were proof of something else. That after everything, addiction, death, illness, loss, Dave Gahan was still here, still standing, still showing up. Personal life, family, faith, and finding balance. Away from the stage, Dave Gahan's life has gone through just as many changes as his career. Today, he's married to his third wife, Jennifer Sklias, a Greek-American actress and filmmaker who has played a steady role in his life for decades. Together, they have a daughter, Stella Rose, born in 1999, who has followed in her father's footsteps and pursued music as a singer. Dave also adopted Jennifer's son from a previous relationship, embracing a full family life that looks very different from his earlier years. Before that, his personal life was far less stable. He has a son, Jack, from his first marriage to Joanne Fox, and his second marriage, to Depeche Mode publicist Teresa Conroy, lasted only a few years before ending. Those earlier relationships unfolded during some of the most chaotic periods of his life, when addiction and fame were pulling him in different directions. With Jennifer, things became more grounded. Before their wedding, Dave even converted to the Greek Orthodox Church, a decision that reflected a deeper search for meaning. Still, he's always been honest about his uncertainty when it comes to belief. In one interview, he admitted, "When it comes to religion, it's very confusing. I don't know what it is I believe in, but I know that I feel a sense of some kind of higher power. It's that mix of doubt and awareness that seems to define him. Not someone with all the answers, but someone who's lived enough to keep asking the questions." Even earlier in his life, he described himself as classically ADD, hinting at the restless, searching nature that has followed him both personally and creatively. Remembering Andy, the loss that changed everything. The project had already begun quietly during the isolation of the pandemic, a time that naturally shaped its tone, its themes, and its mood. But when Andy Fletcher passed away, everything shifted. For Dave Gahan and Martin Gore, the question wasn't whether to continue. It was how. In the end, they chose to move forward, because they believed it's exactly what Fletch would have wanted. Dave said it simply, Fletch would have loved this album. And that belief gave the work a different kind of weight. It wasn't just music anymore. It became something personal, something reflective, almost like a conversation with someone who wasn't there anymore. As fans around the world reacted to the news, the response was overwhelming. Messages, photos, memories, it all came pouring in. Dave and Martin took a moment to acknowledge it, saying they were deeply moved by the love people had shown. They spoke about reading those tributes, seeing those images, and realizing just how much Fletch meant, not just to them, but to everyone who had followed the band for decades. They also shared, for the first time, the truth about his passing. Fletch suffered an aortic dissection, a tear in the large blood vessel of the heart, and passed naturally and peacefully. There was no drama, no warning, just a quiet, irreversible loss. And yet, through that loss, something continued. Because despite everything, addiction, illness, death, and years of internal battles, Dave Gahan is still here, still creating, still carrying the sound of Depeche Mode forward. Not unchanged, but shaped by everything he's survived. So when you listen now, it hits differently. And maybe the real question is, did you ever realize just how much he had been through? Let me know in the comments below, and if you want more deep dive stories like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.